This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with me is Chief Clarence Cox, the incoming president of the Nationalist Organization for Black Law Enforcement, NOBLE, the former chief of police of Clayton County, Georgia. NobleNational.org is the website, and you can tweet Chief Cox at Chief_Cox. Chief Clarence Cox, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us. Tell us about your organization, the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement, and what you all are up to right now with regard to policing and the policing culture in this country.
Well, obviously, we're one of the largest, if not the largest, black organization for law enforcement, and we founded in 1976. And we have approximately 3,500 members or so across the country, and that includes state, federal, county, and municipal agencies. We do a lot in our communities, and especially lately with some of the use of force issues. But one of the staple programs that we offer right now in our communities across the country is a Law in Your Community, where we engage with our citizens and try to explain a little bit about what's going on in our country as it relates to law enforcement. There seems to be a divide, unfortunately, and a lot of it has to do with some of the things that you've seen, the large incidents across the country. And we're working very hard and feverishly to try to change that optic and to educate our public on some things that would be helpful in those encounters.
Yeah. Now, in several of the fairly high-profile killings of unarmed black people in the United States over the last few years, there have been officers of color involved, and although it's, by and large been, white cops killing black civilians. But then we had this situation in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago with a black cop killing a white woman. And a lot of the Sturm and Drang that seems to be coming out of that is that this isn't so much, although it very much is, but it's not so much a problem of white policing against black people as it is that within police culture in the United States, and perhaps largely unique to the United States, this is not so much found, as Michael Moore documented in his movie Where to Invade Next, in European countries. There is this culture of violence itself, that it's not black or white, it's blue. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, one, the thing that has changed the optics, if you will, is the advancement of technology. I would submit that some of these incidents have occurred over the years since law enforcement's inception. And if you think about the many agencies across the country and the percentage of these types of encounters, it's very little. It's not as much as people would tend to believe. It's just highly publicized now because of smartphones and other technology that's able to capture these events and make them look the way they do. And certainly we're not proud of some of the conduct some of the officers have displayed. And, as you mentioned, the thing in Minneapolis, we're not happy about that one either. And until that's concluded or an investigation is completed, I won't make any comments personally or professionally on what I thought happened there. But certainly there needs to be an investigation, and I think the mayor was in the right perspective to do some of the things that have already been done. The acting chief has instituted a policy that all officers will engage their body cameras at the inception of the calls. I think that will be a little bit of a helpful measure. But certainly we've got a lot of work to do. And I think what has happened is we've dehumanized policing and police officers. As we talk about things like this, we talk about the fact that these are happening in the communities. But if you think deeper in this, we are members of the community, and somehow somebody forgot about that. Somebody forgot that we are part of the community, and a lot of these issues hurt us as much as they hurt the public who screams and protests about it.
Yeah.
We're just sworn to uphold the law, and we do our best to make sure that that happens. But certainly we're not happy when we see incidents like this, whether they're white or black.
Yeah, I have been saying, I have some general familiarity with law enforcement. I was writing some novels about private detectives and ended up going through the Georgia Police Academy program back in 1998, I think it was.
Oh, okay.
And one of my best friends who got me into that program was a police chief, DeWitt Wanamaker. I don't know if you know him, from Georgia, rural Georgia.
Right.
And I've had run-ins with the law in my life too, and as most people have, and it strikes me. What I've been saying for years, and particularly since that experience of going through the police academy, was that our teachers hold our future in their hands, and our cops hold our present, the quality of life of our present, in their hands, and neither one of them are respected or paid enough. Number one. And arguably, and particularly with regard to police, not so much teachers, they're not held accountable enough by the local communities. In fact, there's not even a mechanism for it in the case of police, or if there is, it doesn't seem to work all that well. What are your thoughts on how policing in the United States can be reformed so it's less reactive and less violent and more more community-centered, more compassionate? Sounds like too weak a word, but I think you know what I'm trying to get to.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I'm glad you brought that question into this interview. One of the greatest tools that I've seen of late has been the task force, the 21st Century Policing Task Force that the former President Obama created, and that was to dive in to some of these issues to find out what it is that is causing some of these use of force issues, some of these mistrust problems that we have in the community. And I felt that was probably the best tool that we've seen in the last century, and it has been since watered down a bit since the new administration has come into office, and some of the things that were put in place, like the Baltimore had some federal mandates that were in place, and they've been since removed. I think we're going to go backwards in a sense until we actually demand that we have some sort of police reform. And certainly, I agree with some of the points you bring out about the pay and the respect. But one of the first things that I was told when I was in the academy back in the early 80s was, if you came into this job to be rich, then you need to get up and leave the room. Yep. And so, this is not a job that, we're going to get paid a whole lot of money, and most of us know that coming into this. So you either got to do it because something you love to do, or you just can't find something else to do.
But it should be a good job. I mean, in Norway, doctors make around $120,000 a year, and so do cops.
Right.
But you got to be a college graduate to be a police officer in Norway. I mean, why can't we raise standards and raise pay in this country? What's wrong with us that we can't do that?
Well, it's sort of like, if you remember, shortly after 9/11, the government put a lot of unfunded mandates onto local jurisdictions, and they just soon went away because it was bankrupting normal jurisdictions. And I think when you start putting those mandates, if you don't put money toward those mandates, then they're just no good. They're not as good as the paper that you wrote them on. So when we look at some of the things that people are asking for in the criminal justice system, you got to think cops are put in a position where they have to make decisions rapidly, obviously, but we're also dealing with other things. We're dealing with mental health issues. We're dealing with, anytime something's wrong in a household, the first thing the household owner or the, whoever's in charge, they dial 911. And, a lot of times those problems aren't something that's germane to a law enforcement issue, but they become a law enforcement issue because when we arrive, somebody expects us to do something.
Well, and half the people in our prisons are mentally ill.
Right.
I mean, we're dealing with a mental health crisis with guns.
And
it's crazy.
Remember the early 80s with the war on drugs, that kind of went away, and now we're back almost in that same position with the expansion of opioid drugs that are,
right.
We got a lot of prescription drugs that are hitting the streets and kind of overriding the illicit drugs, the methamphetamine, the cocaine, and the things that you see. They're being kind of outweighed by prescription drugs. So as we look at our future, we've got to put some things in place to try to combat a lot of the issues that are not necessarily law enforcement. We got to look at our entire criminal justice system. That's not something that a police officer on the street or administrator of a police agency can change. It has to be a collective and involved effort to change this whole perspective of our justice system.
It's so very, very well said. Chief Clarence Cox, it has been a pleasure and an honor talking with you, sir, today. The incoming president of the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement, noblenational.org is the website. You can tweet him at Chief_Cox. Chief Cox, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
I really appreciate it. Very thoughtful conversation. It's marvelous, and I wish you the very best in everything you're doing. We will be right back with your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after this.